Chapter 5. Sometimes all of the options suck. "How much longer, Coran?" Pidge asked. Coran didn't reply immediately, and she ground her teeth in frustration. The Empire did not treat its captives well, and Pidge did not like how long it was taking to mend the damage that they'd done to her father. Matt had come out of his own heel pod this morning, his injured leg sound and pain-free, even though he was still thinner than she liked. The group of prisoners that she and Shiro had rescued had taken over a week to recover, and she did not want to have to wait that long to hug her father again. "He's coming along as well as can be expected," Coran said. "You're a resilient bunch, but his system's been under a lot of strain for over a year, and the broken bones and bruised organs didn't help. Personally, I'd say he's in excellent shape for a chap who came that close to becoming a monster's breakfast. He should be out any time now, actually. Should I ask Shiro to bring you a snack from the kitchen?" Pidge closed her eyes and heaved a deep, calming breath. "All right. Enough for two, please. I'm not leaving this room until I can leave it with him. Where's Matt?" Coran smiled. "In the kitchen. Turns out that Galra and humans can eat a lot of the same things, so Lazen's been teaching Hunk cosmic cookery. Matt's volunteered to test the results. Making up for lost time, I figure. I'll just go and see if he left you any." Pidge nodded and sat down at the foot of her father's heel pod as Coran made his way out. Matt had always had a healthy appetite. After roughly a year and a half of short and not terribly nutritious rations, any kitchen run by Hunk would be a happy little annex of heaven for him. Pidge scrubbed at gritty eyes with the heels of her hands and tried to feel triumphant. After all, she'd recovered her family despite quite literally astronomical odds. But all she wanted to do was weep. Stress, she knew, and relief and lack of sleep was causing that. Some part of her mind hadn't quite been able to process the fact that her long search was over, and she'd been having nightmares of losing her father and brother again for the past 3 nights in a row. Just to defy them, she'd spent most of her time in the infirmary, guarding them against whatever the winds of fate might throw at them. Shiro and the others had come in now and then to keep her company, but for the most part her vigil had been a lonely one. Once her father was out of that pod and poking around the castle, and once she'd had a decent night's rest, she'd be able to revel in her achievements. Pidge leaned back against the heel pod and tried to relax. She'd won. It was a small win, but any win against an entire evil empire was a win well won. She was actually starting to nod off when Shiro and Matt came in, Matt with a fistful of beverage packets and Shiro carrying a large mixed platter of something that smelled delicious. Matt looked better, she noticed, and from the residual smear of something pink on his chin, had probably stuffed himself. Someone, probably Lance, had run him by the castle's auto tailor as well, and he had exchanged the black bodysuit and ragged tunic for the Altean equivalent of a t-shirt and shorts. "Hi," he said, sitting down beside her and motioning Shiro to do the same. "How's Dad?" "Coran says he's almost done," Pidge replied, glancing up at the sleeping figure in the pod and reaching for a crisp fried something from the platter. "He can't give me a better estimate than that, though." "Count your blessings," Shiro said with a smile and handed her a beverage packet. "At home, he'd probably be laid up for a month. I'm willing to wait a few more hours instead. How are you doing?" Pidge nibbled at the fried thing and discovered that she was hungrier than she'd thought. "Tired. A little depressed. I shouldn't be, but I am. Does that happen often?" Shiro leaned back with a sigh. "It's not uncommon for a victory to seem anticlimactic. Keep eating, it'll help some." Matt snickered and then burped. "Hunk's having too much fun in the kitchen right now with that Galra lady. They're only making little things, but they're making all the little things, and all of it's good. I'm stuffed, Lance is in a food coma, and Keith's getting there. Even the dragons are starting to fill up." Pidge giggled and grabbed a square of something green. "How about Coran and the princess?" Shiro shook his head. Alora's still too wary of Lazen to eat something she made, and Coran's keeping her company. I don't blame her, really. Matt blinked up at him in confusion. "Did a Galra bite her when she was little or something?" "You could say that." Shiro rubbed at his battle arm reflexively. "The Galra killed her parents, destroyed her homeworld, and nearly drove her people to extinction. I don't know any of the details beyond that, but it left an impression on her that isn't going to wear off in a hurry. Matt shivered. There's a lot of that going around. We used to hear a lot of that while working in the shipyard. This planet over there staged an uprising and was destroyed. That alien race over there wouldn't pay the tributes and got eradicated. Another somewhere else got defeated and was enslaved. And one of the soldiers said that ours was next. That was probably meant just to scare us. He was that kind of guy, but I'm worried. Paige wrapped an arm around his shoulders in an attempt to comfort him. I won't let them, Matt. We won't let them. I've got a big robot cat that says... There was a fizzle from the heel pod, and the screen dissolved. Sam Holt was lowered gently onto his feet, and he blinked blearily around himself. What happened? He muttered groggily, taking an uncertain step forward, and tripped over Pidge. Shiro was up in a flash and caught him before he could land face first on the floor. Easy, Sam. I've got you. You're safe. How are you feeling? Sam said, his face jammed into Shiro's shoulder. He managed to get his legs untangled enough to straighten up a bit, and gazed into Shiro's face with a huge smile of joy and relief. Shiro? Shiro! You made it! You're alive! I never thought that I'd see you again. That filthy arena. What happened to your arm? His hand had grasped Shiro's right arm, and had found metal instead of muscle. Shiro smiled bitterly and flexed the hand. That filthy arena, and the ones running it. It could have been a lot worse. I'm not the only lucky one here, Sam. Sit down and hug Katie, and grab some snacks while I tell you what's been going on since we were separated. Katie? That's right, she was... Oomph! Sam suddenly had a huge armful of grinning daughter, her own arms clamped tight around his torso. Hi, Dad, she said, tears streaming down her face. I found you. Sam sank down to his knees, wrapping his arms around her shoulders and holding on tight. My hero, he whispered roughly into her ear. How did you wind up out here, too? It couldn't have been a search party. The Kerberos mission was the longest range that humanity's ever gone on, and it's only been a year. They can't possibly have put together a star drive in a year. Oh, God, Katie. You weren't kidnapped too, were you? How's your mother? Paige giggled damply, wiping her face on her father's shirt. Last I saw her, Mom was fine. I got kidnapped, but not by Galra. By who, then? Sam asked. By a lion. By the time the tale had been told, the platter was empty and Sam was looking slightly shell-shocked. And I'd thought that Matt and I were having a harrowing space adventure. Katie, when I told you that I knew that you were going to be doing something great with your life, well, I hadn't imagined this. Are you really going to topple an absolute ruler? We're going to give it our best shot, Pidge said, snuggling closer. Her arm was starting to ache from holding on to her father, but she didn't care. Zarkon's got a lot to answer for, and we're going to make him pay. Matt smirked. Kick his butt a few times for me, okay? Those work camps are really awful. Hey, Katie, can we see your lion? Dad had already passed out when we left the shipyard, and I just saw this huge robot chopping warships to bits. I'd like to see your part up close. Paige glanced at Shiro, who nodded. Sure, I can do that. She might not let you look under the hood, but there's nothing wrong with admiring her. I do it all the time. Shiro opted to take the platter back to the kitchen, leaving Paige to lead her family to the Green Lion's hangar, knowing full well that they needed some private time to reconnect. Paige was thankful for that, and she hurried her kin along to the express lift, and was further gratified by the way their faces lit up when they got their first look at the lion. Sam Holt looked up, and then further up, at the magnificent machine sitting before them in the hangar bay, and let out a long, awed exhalation. My God, Katie. She's beautiful. And she's yours? Paige grinned hugely, inordinately proud of her lion. Green wasn't the biggest or the most impressive, but she was indispensable, and she was all hers. Yep, I'm still learning how to fly her, but I'm making progress. Her father stepped forward and laid a hand on one great metal forepaw, his amber eyes devouring every detail, while Matt trotted around to one side to study the articulation of the joints. I've heard of these, Sam murmured, craning his neck to peer at the articulation in the Green Lion's body. The guards and overseers used to talk about them all the time, especially after you took down that first monster. Talscott would go on for hours about them, especially if he'd been drinking. Very little is actually known about how the lions were built and what made them tick, but he had files and files of educated guesses. You'd know more than anybody else at this stage. Not really, Pidge admitted. I've been studying her whenever I can, but I don't dare dig too deep. If I break her, there's no garage that can fix her, and the lion can defend herself if she wants to. Can she? Matt asked, turning to gaze curiously at his sister. She nodded. They're alive, guys. Not exactly like us, but, well, they've got their own ideas about how to do things, and they won't teach us everything all at once. There's no manuals, so we have to play by the lion's rules. They speak to us, sort of, like telepathic messages. Feelings. I'll be flying around and just suddenly know how something works. Sometimes they'll do things all on their own, especially if we're in danger. We have to form a close bond, an emotional bond with them, or nothing works. They don't take in any fuel and they repair themselves when they get banged around. I'm not even exactly sure how we steer them. I mean, there are hand controls in the cockpits, but we've all been just sort of shoving them around however we feel like it. An intuitive system? Sam asked. Pidge shrugged helplessly. Either that, or the controls are all for show and we're controlling them with our minds. Or it's magic. I hope not. Magic doesn't exactly make good science, Dad. He chuckled and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Oh, I don't know. How did that old saying go? Oh, yes. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. 100 years ago, hover scoots would have seemed like a miracle to many people. 200 years ago, people would have looked at you funny if you told them that men would walk and even live on the moon. 300 years ago, powered aircraft were purest fantasy. 400 years ago, harnessing lightning was a fool's dream. That lion is magical to us for the moment. It may be a child's toy 100 years from now. She's not a toy, Dad, Pidge said quietly, leaning into his embrace and remembering how easily her lion had destroyed other spacecraft. Voltron won't ever be a toy. He grinned irreverently at her. Except for the millions and millions of little plastic ones that your adoring fans will treasure. Well, you got an action figure of yourself. How about ones of your friends? I'd buy them, Matt said with a grin. That's what I want for my next birthday, Dad. I want the whole set and the green paladin Halloween costume, too. Pidge gurgled a laugh and buried her face in her father's side, wrapping her arms about his waist. In truth, she could barely believe that her family was here and alive, warm and solid and real after so long, and that was even more magical than the lions were. Nobody out here is going to be making Voltron action figures, Matt. Not for sale to the general public. Zarkon would freak out and destroy somebody's planet if he found out about it. I'm going to buy some, her father teased gently. I'll reserve the whole set and get you a Zarkon plushie to kick across the room whenever you feel like it. She poked him in the ribs. I'll hold you to that. Get me the biggest and ugliest one they've got. Just like that giant stuffed eggplant you won at that carnival once. Sam laughed. I remember that. You were, 9 years old at that time? Matt dared me to try the lucky toss game after I said that it was rigged, and I won. Allie laughed at that, and then carried it around for the rest of the night. Matt giggled. We could barely fit it into the car, and you threatened to strap me to the hood if I couldn't get it in. I cheated by letting one end hang out of the window. Sam grinned at his son. It's just as well that we didn't pass any cyclists on the way home, wasn't it? And then the very next day, you and your sister jumped up and down on it until the seams burst, and Gunther spread the stuffing all over the living room. Mom blew up, Pidge sighed, and winced anew at the long-ago scolding. I'd never seen her that mad. I miss her. Her father sobered, and his eyes grew sad. So do I. I can only imagine how she feels right now. Pidge clasped her father's hand in her own and stood there for a long moment, the pair leaning on each other for comfort. Hopeful, I think, she murmured eventually. We sent some messages home with Lisanne. She says she delivered them to the academy right in the middle of a press conference. Sam hummed thoughtfully, stroking her hair. Can you trust her? I think so. She and Mutri got you and Matt back for us." Sam heaved a deep breath and raised his eyes to gaze at the lion again. "They did. All the same, be careful. If there's anything that the past year has taught me, it's that the Galra are dedicated hunters. Those two might be your friends for the moment, but they have their own agenda, count on that. Once they're committed to doing something, Galra don't give up." Pidge nodded. "We know. They'll be leaving as soon as we find a decent shipyard. Allura would prefer it if they kept their distance anyway." Sam snorted in amusement at that. Having heard of their experiences with the vicious Sendak and his equally unpleasant henchman only a little time ago, he could relate. "The princess has her reasons, poor girl," Sam said quietly. "I don't envy her at all. Do you think that your lion would let me have a look at the controls?" Pidge let go of her father with reluctance. "Maybe. Let's find out." She knocked on the lion's forepaw and called out, "Green, can I show my dad how awesome you are inside?" The lion didn't move, and Sam let out a faintly relieved laugh. "I get it. She's your ride, not mine. Besides, if I did get too good a look, I might wind up building my own, eh?" He cast a wistful look up at the feline cephalon. "Take care of my little girl, Green. I want her back in one piece when all of this is done with." The lion didn't react to that either, but he wasn't really expecting a reply. Matt humphed into the leonine's silence, and then noticed Pidge's workbench off to one side, piled with bits and pieces of sentry and other mechanical trash. "Hey, you've been studying too. I spent weeks building those things. Want some tips?" "Sure," Pidge said, and followed him over to the bench. They were still fiddling happily around with the dented chassis of a sentry when the PA system sent Shiro's voice echoing around the room. "Pidge? Sam? Matt? I hate to disturb you, but Allura's called a conference in the main lounge. We need to figure out what to do next before the Empire decides to do it for us." Pidge reached over and pressed the reply button. "We're on our way," she answered, and followed that up with a quiet, "Drat." Sam chuckled and put down his screwdriver. "Reminds me of when I was working in the Science Institute. There were so many forward planning meetings that we never got anything done. A little impatient, isn't she?" Pidge sighed and began putting away her tools. "Yeah, but it's sort of necessary. Right now, the only advantage we've got is speed. Let's go and see what we can do." "Think she'll stay?" Lance said quietly, leaning back against the couch's cushions. "I mean, her search is over and all, and she said that was the only reason why she was out here." "I hope so. We need her," Keith said. "We'll probably have to swing by Earth anyway to take the others home, but I think that we should all at least get a choice." Hunk groaned. "Don't tempt me, man. Don't even mention it within a light year of my grandma. You'll start an argument that'll probably last all year." Lance puffed a faint laugh. "Or my folks. That would start a civil war that would probably wind up raising Castro's ghost. Again. My mom and my aunts would all want me back, and my uncles would all want a space hero in the family. Not that I mind being a space hero, but where I come from, you don't cross your aunts unless it's a matter of life and death. And my cousins! Don't talk to me about cousins. You haven't seen a real riot unless you've seen my cousins riled up about something." Shiro couldn't help but smile at that. "If you hadn't noticed, it is a matter of life and death. If Zarkon isn't stopped, and soon, it's life or death for everyone." Hunk leaned forward in his seat, looking worried. "Yeah, but if she does leave, we're going to have to find a replacement, and one that her lion will accept. Sure, everyone on Earth will want to give it a try, but there's no guarantee that the lion will want anyone else." Karan tugged soberly at his mustache. "It's a big problem. The lions are picky, very picky about who they allow at their controls. After all, Voltron's the greatest battle machine in the known universe, and you don't just let any slob fly something like that. It's a bit odd that they all chose paladins from one planet, really. All the other teams were very mixed. Why, there was this one team that was made up of a Krabalto and a Boryan, a Slu, a Tlerbau, and an Ibathi, and just doing the catering required a staff of over 100 specially trained culinary artists. And, as I recall, The Tlurba was a devout pluricite, while the Slew was a born-in-the-bone atheist. The Krabalto smoked like a volcano, really smoked, he was a fire breather, and the Abathi had insisted on having potted plants all over the place that gave everyone else a rash. Everyone stared at him. "And what did the Aborian do?" Hunk asked. Kurian shrugged. "Made a mess his private workshop. He was a sculptor, and quite a good one. Damn good team. Shame about that ambush." "Yeah, but how many cadets decided to quit?" Keith asked. "This isn't an easy job, you know." "None," Allura replied. "Whole academies were dedicated to training cadets for the Lions, so that they would always have the best and brightest to choose from. There were thousands, even tens of thousands of young warriors hoping to qualify for 5 seats, and all very dedicated." Koran raised a finger. "Yes, but there was that one time when the Red Lion ignored all the qualified candidates, had to have been a couple hundred of them, and flew 2 miles east to a roadside convenience store and chose a 78-year-old janitor. Kind of upset everybody, including the janitor, but it all worked well enough in the end. Best right arm Voltron ever had." Allura gave him a withering glare for the interruption and continued. "Past a certain point in their training, the Lions would not release their chosen paladins even if they had wanted to quit. I'm not sure how far along the Green Lion judge's pitch to be. To any but their own, the Lions will not speak. She may have no choice but to stay with us, and that goes for the rest of you as well." Lance smiled. "Fine with me. Blue and I get along just fine, and I'm not giving her up. She's the one really cool thing I've got that hasn't been manhandled by 6 or 7 cousins first. I'd at least like to visit my folks, if only to show off a little." "That may not be possible," Shiro said. "In fact, that's probably a very bad idea." "What is?" Pidge asked, walking in with her father and brother at her side. Allura raised a hand in greeting. "Showing off, which Lance enjoys rather too much. Make yourselves comfortable, please, and introduce us to your father." Sam Holt was perfectly willing to be introduced to a genuine alien princess and her lone courtier, and Hunk and Lance were happy to make his acquaintance as well. He also turned and dipped a small bow to the other 2 people sitting in on this discussion. Lizen and Modri had been included more out of courtesy than anything else, and the pair had acknowledged that by sitting very quietly to one side. "I didn't get to say this earlier," Sam said soberly, "but thank you for rescuing us. You arrived just in time." The 2 Galras smiled to hear that. "Thank your daughter for setting us on your trail," Lizen replied with a wink in Pidge's direction. "We would never have found you otherwise." Matt wrapped his arms around his sister. "I'll take care of that. Thank you, Katie." Sam smiled at that, but his eyes remained serious. "I still have to ask, though. Why are you helping her? I asked that before, but your man there didn't have time to explain earlier." Lizen did not answer immediately, gazing thoughtfully at the assembled paladins and Alteans for a moment before speaking. "Several reasons, the most important of which is that Voltron has come out of hiding at last, and it must not fall into the hands of the Emperor. Nothing causes a disaster like loss and strife within a new team. By rescuing you, we have prevented a very great deal of heartbreak and drama that your daughter and her friends simply cannot afford right now." Her lips twisted into a wicked smile. "It also allowed me to stab a druid, and the less of those there are flapping about, the better. That's not important right now. What is important is that you have regained your freedom, and what you intend to do with it from this point on." "Yeah, that's a toughie," Hunk said. "I suppose they could stay with us. The castle's nice, but it's big and really empty, and if it gets haunted again, I'd like to have some more people around to panic with. Hey, Allura, can we keep them?" Lance nodded, liking that idea. "We could use a couple of trained scientists aboard. There's too much about, well, everything that we don't know." "We could use the backup," Keith said, "and they know more about the enemy than we do." Pidge shook her head. "I'd rather that we take them home. We're in serious danger out here, guys, and I want them back home where it's safer. Besides, if Mom ever finds out that I could have brought them back and didn't, she'd walk out here and kick all of our butts." "She'd do it, too," Matt said with a worried look at his father. "We need to go home, Dad, and not just because of Mom." Sam rubbed at his eyes and nodded. "We do. Lizen, you did deliver those messages, right?" She nodded. "In as loud and public a manner as I could manage on short notice, yes. They were having what looked to be a press conference, and there were something like 200 eager reporters and recording specialists getting vids of my ship. I didn't land and hand the packet off in person. Too much opportunity for misunderstandings there. But your world is now well aware that aliens do exist. Those that haven't convinced themselves that it was all a hoax, of course. Matt grunted in disgust. There's always someone. You didn't stay any longer than that? We couldn't, Lizen replied. There was a heavy cruiser patrolling the outer planets, and I didn't want to draw any attention to what we were doing. The Blue Lion was spotted on that planet, remember? And if anyone is seen to be showing unwarranted interest in that world, it will get back to the Emperor, and then he might take an interest. Right now, he's focused on finding you, not on your people. Let's keep it that way. Sam looked up with a determined expression on his face. That's why we have to go home, and as soon and as secretly as possible. Like he said, we know more about the Galra and their technology than any other human does. Earth must have that knowledge, especially now that the Empire's going to build the Bagantush destroyer. The what? Karan asked. The Bagantush destroyer, Modri said quietly, surprising them all. He'd been so unobtrusive that they'd forgotten that he was there. Prorock and his party finally got the funding for that thing, then. I wonder how they snuck that past Hagar. No, wait, it was probably the destruction of that roe beast that did it. What do you mean, Modri? Allura demanded. What is this destroyer? Modri leaned forward, bracing his elbows on his knees. He had spent the past several days resting in the cabin he shared with Lizen, recovering from his efforts during the rescue, and so hadn't been available to speak. The Empire has a very small fleet of very large warships that people generally refer to as planet busters, and that's what they do. If the Emperor decides that a particular planet has outlived its usefulness, he sends one or two of them out, and very soon that planet is nothing more than a spreading debris field. There are only a dozen or so of them, and they are very expensive to power and use. The Bagantush destroyer was supposed to render the lot of them obsolete, but building it would require an astronomical amount of money and materials. It's been on and off the drawing board for years. I hadn't heard of that, Modri, Lizen said sharply. He winced at her tone. And I was too sick to tell you. I never thought that it would actually go through anyway. Hagar had a top-secret project in the works that superseded it, and you know that Zarkon favors her. Allura had gone very pale. Tell us now. Tell us everything that you know of it. How did you find out about it? Modri chuckled and straightened up. I'm a ship tech. Nobody gossips like engineers, Princess, and the smarter of us pay attention to the politics behind the policies. Prorock's a member of the General Staff, answering only to the Emperor himself. He's smart, but he's ambitious, and he doesn't trust sorcery. As a result, he and Hagar are in constant competition for Zarkon's favor. That poor fellow is destined for a sticky end, mark my words. The Bagantush destroyer has been his pet project for something like 8 or 9 years now. I've actually seen the blueprints once. It's a massive project. Something like 3 or 4 planets would have to be dismantled completely to provide the materials, and the power core would be the largest ever built. Zarkon must have been more than a little disappointed with Hagar's recent failures if he's giving Prorock the go-ahead. Sam nodded. So I've heard. I've also heard that the planets have already been picked out. Sandraman, Vosp, and Harperon. All 3 of them are living worlds that have resisted Imperial control. A Telka shipyard is going to be building some of the parts for the destroyer, and Talscott and his best engineers were very excited about it. Do they have those plans yet? Pidge asked. Sam shook his head. Not yet. There were some parts of them that needed more tweaking, and that's being done at the center where all the best planners are. Talscott was saying that they'd be getting them in maybe a month or so. With something that big, everything has to be done right the first time. Even with several shipyards working on the parts non-stop, it'll still take a long time to put together. They're also going to want to test it out when it's completed. If we can get Earth's governments moving in the right direction, we may be able to defend ourselves in the event that Zarkon decides to do something about Earth. Or at the least, enough of us will be able to escape to continue the race somewhere else if we do lose the planet. Some of the Kepler planets should be habitable, maybe. Lance gurgled in horrified disgust. I am not losing Earth. I keep all my stuff there. There's only one copy of those plans, right? They can't build the ship without the instructions. How about we go and steal the instructions? We can't, Hunk said firmly. If they're keeping them in the center, that's gotta be like the most heavily guarded part of the Empire. We'd be handing the lions to them on a silver platter. It's too dangerous, guys. We just aren't good enough at fighting with Voltron yet. But 3 whole planets are going to die, along with everyone on them, Matt protested. Lazen, you're Galra. Can you do something? Lazen gestured a negative. After the mess we caused getting you two loose? No. I've already been branded as a rogue witch and a traitor. I checked just this morning. As of a few hours ago, my family disowned me and declared me dead. If I put 1 foot in the halls of Parzarak, I'll land in Hagar's lab instantly, and nobody that matters will know or care what happens to me from that point on. I'd be lucky if they just killed me. If I can get a new ship soon, I might be able to find out which shipyards will get those contracts and do a bit of constructive sabotage, but that's all. That isn't good enough, Keith said. Those 3 planets will still be destroyed. We have to do something. I can do it, Modri said. What? Lazen squawked, and everyone turned to stare at him. He smiled thinly at their astonished faces. I can do it, and all I will need is the right uniform, the right tools, shuttle fare, and a little fancy flying. You forget, I am an engineer. For a time, I was a captain. I know the necessary levels of the center intimately. I can manufacture an ID easily. I haven't been there in over a year, and my appearance has changed considerably since my downfall. I know for certain that nobody will notice me in any case. The engineering levels swarm with personnel, the roster is always changing, and it's not your name that matters, it's your rank. I've never been particularly noteworthy, and they aren't aware that I'm part of this group. Or anywhere. Dead, destroyed, and burned, remember? I doubt very much that Lazen allowed anyone to see her when she rescued me. Lazen snorted. Oh, they saw me all right. They saw a young soldier who had drawn the short straw for fetching samples for Hagar's druids. Believe me, nobody wanted to inspect that crate, for fear of finding parts of someone they'd known in it. Which is what new recruits are for, doing all the jobs that the more experienced soldiers prefer to avoid. Mothri scowled. I certainly did my share of those. Allura, all that you will need to do is set me down on the nearest planet to the center that we can manage without getting caught. I'll buy a seat on a transport shuttle like any other traveler, and make my way from there. If all goes well, you'll pick me up from that same planet a little time later. Give me a communicator, and I can call you for a ride. The whole trip shouldn't take more than a day or 2. Modri, no, Lazen growled. You're not strong enough for this yet. If you run into trouble, we won't be able to help you. He laid a reassuring hand on hers. Strength is not the issue. Wits are, and you've done wonders for those. This is my area of skill, and no one else here is able. His golden eyes flashed, and his voice took on a hint of steel, and no few of the others wondered what Modri had been like before Hagar had broken him. Will you condemn billions of innocent people to a horrible death to prevent mine? I will do this, Lazen. I will be careful, but if the paladins will provide me with what I need to do it, I will do this. I have seen planets destroyed before, and I will not permit it to happen again, not if there is any way that I can stop it. She glared at him, then sighed. Never let it be said that you lack courage. Good sense, perhaps, but truth is not always sensible. Just bear in mind that if this does go bad, I may well do something drastic. I've put far too much effort into preserving you to lose you now. You are mine, Modri, and I will not lose you again. Modri gave her a sweet smile and kissed her on one cheek. Your love is my strength, Lazen. Is my offer acceptable, princess? Allura shivered. Your sacrifice, you mean? Is there no other way? Pidge is very good at hacking computer systems. He shook his head. No. Sensitive projects of this nature are kept in an isolated databank that has no outside access, and I already know where it is and how to deal with it. I did say that I had seen the plans, remember? Taking her along would be foolish. The only places on that station other than the tourist levels where non-Galra people are allowed are the arena pit, the lab deck, and the prison blocks. I must do this alone if it is to be done at all.
Very well, then,
Alora said, squaring her shoulders. Make a list of what you will need to pull this off, and I will see to it that the castle provides.